The dust of Ctesiphon does not taste of sand. It tastes of iron. It is April, 341 AD. The heat rising from the Tigris riverbanks distorts the air, but the sound is clear enough to stop the market crowds. It is the sound of 300 women, Christian virgins, nuns, and daughters of the nobility, being dragged in chains toward the royal enclosure. They are not soldiers. They hold no swords. Yet, the King of Kings, Shapur II, has deployed his elite guard to surround them, as if they were a Roman legion. In the center of the dust stands the executioner, not with an axe, but with a scribe's table. On it sits the motif that will define this massacre, a clay tax seal. Shapur's demand is simple. The empire needs gold for the war against Rome. These women must denounce their vows, marry, and pay the double tax levied on their faith. Two questions hang in the heavy air. Why is the most powerful emperor in the East terrified of these unarmed women? And what irreversible cost must be paid when the only way to keep your soul is to erase your name from the earth? The scribe dips his quill. The silence stretches. But the ink in his jar is not the only fluid that will be spilled today. If you enjoy these dark histories, leave a like and subscribe and comment below where you're listening from. And now, back to the story. The spectacle ends, but the machinery of the state is just beginning to turn. The women are marched away from the Tigris, leaving the open air for the stifling, incense-heavy gloom of the royal holding cells. Here, the stone walls are thick enough to swallow screams, and the only light comes from the sacred fires maintained by the Magi. Institutional control asserts itself immediately. They are not treated as prisoners of war, but as inventory. A scribe follows the guards, his quill scratching against parchment. He does not write their names, he writes numbers. 1 to 300. Each woman is stripped of her identity and reduced to a potential tax unit. The clay seal from the riverbank appears again, stamped onto the ledger. They are assets to be liquidated or converted. The heavy cedar doors slam shut, cutting off the sounds of Ctesiphon. The air immediately grows hot and still. Silence is the first weapon of the state. Inside the gloom, the Mobads, Zoroastrian priests serving Shapur, begin the sorting process. They move through the ranks of the women, inspecting them like livestock. They look for the weak, the young, the terrified. The goal is not massacre. That is a waste of resources. The goal is assimilation. If these women break, the Christian resistance in Persia breaks. A young novice begins to weep. A guard steps forward, raising a rod of green willow, but a Mobad stops him with a raised hand. Violence is premature. Instead, he offers a mercy that is sharper than a sword. He holds out a bowl of fresh water. The heat in the cell is suffocating. Lips are cracked and bleeding. "Drink," the Mobad says, his voice reasonable, almost kind. "Return to your homes. Marry. Bear sons for the empire. The tax will be forgiven." It is a simple transaction. Trade a god for a husband. Trade a vow for water. The young novice reaches out. Her fingers brush the cool clay of the bowl. The room holds its breath. Then, she looks at the woman beside her, an elder with eyes like flint. The girl pulls her hand back. She lowers her head and closes her eyes. The Mobad sighs, disappointed. He tips the bowl. The water splashes onto the dirty flagstones, turning the dust into mud. Thirst is the price of keeping your soul. The final trial does not take place in a dungeon, but in the glaring light of the royal courtyard. Shapur II sits on a raised dais, shaded by silk tapestries that ripple in the hot wind. The 300 women stand exposed to the sun they refuse to worship. They are weak from days of fasting, their lips parched, their robes torn, yet they stand in a formation as rigid as the immortals who guard the king. The head Mobad steps forward. He holds the ledger. The time for individual negotiation is over. This is a matter of state security. To Shapur, these women represent a demographic crisis. Every virgin is a womb denied to the empire. Every nun is a mother who will not birth a soldier to fight Rome. Their chastity is not a virtue here, it is an act of treason. "The King of Kings is generous," the Mobad announces, his voice carrying over the courtyard. "He offers you life. He offers you husbands of high rank. Break your sterile vows, contribute to the glory of Persia, and the tax is forgotten." He waits. The wind snaps the silk. A fly buzzes near the ear of the nearest guard, but he does not swat it. An elder nun, her hair matted with the dust of the cell, steps out of the line. She does not look at the Mobad. She looks directly at Shapur, the guards tense, hands tightening on spear shafts. "This is the moment of compliance or destruction. We cannot pay you in gold," she says, her voice dry as dead leaves, and we cannot pay you in sons. We belong to a kingdom you cannot conquer. A crown is heavy, but a martyr's chain is weightless. Shapur's expression does not change, but his hand moves. He signals to the captain of the guard. The offer is withdrawn. The tactic shifts from conversion to annihilation. The guards move in, not to strike, but to separate. They begin to drag the women into smaller groups, forcing them to their knees. The violence is sudden and precise. One young guard grabs a woman by the shoulder to force her down. She does not resist. She goes limp, falling to her knees with a heavy thud. The guard freezes. He expects a struggle, a scream, a plea. Her total surrender to the position of execution unnerves him. He pulls his hand back as if burned, staring at the back of her neck. He looks to his captain, a question in his eyes, but the captain only nods grimly. The why is resolved. This was never about gold. It was about authority. Shapur cannot allow a power to exist within his borders that he cannot touch. The price is now absolute. If they will not be mothers to Persians, they will be fuel for the fear that holds the empire together. The silence of the women is no longer a defense. It is their weapon. It denies Shapur the satisfaction of their terror. They turn the courtyard into a cathedral, and the executioner into a priest sending them home. The blade cannot hurt what has already died to this world. Night does not bring peace to Ctesiphon. It brings the scavengers. The bodies of the 300 are hauled away on ox carts, dumped in the open fields beyond the city walls, where the jackals wait. Shapur retires to his palace, satisfied that the matter is closed. The tax was refused, the penalty exacted, the ledger balanced. But in the darkness, a different kind of harvest begins. Shadows detach themselves from the city gates. They are not thieves coming to rob the dead. They are the faithful coming to rob the dogs. In total silence, risking the same death they just witnessed, local Christians creep through the brush. There are no prayers spoken here, no hymns sung. The rite is purely physical. They wrap the severed remains in linen. They use sponges to soak up the blood from the dust. The earth remembers what the archive tries to forget. The true revelation, however, does not lie in the bones, but back in the scribe's office. The clay tax seal, the motif of their doom, sits on the desk next to the scroll of names. Shapur believed this list was a record of treason, a catalogue of women who refused to be useful to the state. He thought he was erasing them from the future of Persia. He was wrong. Decades later, when the Bishop Maruthas arrives from the Roman frontier to compile the acts of the Persian martyrs, he does not have to rely solely on whispers. He finds the records. The empire's obsession with bureaucracy becomes its undoing. The very list created to tax and condemn these women becomes the primary source for their canonization. Every name the scribe wrote down to strike out was actually being transcribed into history. In the dim light of the excavation, the contradiction becomes clear. In Act 1, we assumed the cost of their resistance was the erasure of their identity. But the evidence suggests the opposite. By forcing them to identify themselves for the tax, Shapur ensured their names would outlast his dynasty. The clay seal did not close their story. It preserved it in fire-hardened earth. A name written in a police ledger lasts longer than one carved on a tombstone. The Arch of Ctesiphon still stands today, a massive hollow mouth of brick yawning at the desert sky. But the city behind it is gone. The royal enclosure where the scribe dipped his quill has been ground down by 16 centuries of wind. The ledger that cataloged the women as tax units has long since turned to dust, the parchment consumed by the very earth that swallowed the bodies. There is no physical marker for the 300. No stone pillar lists their names in the ruins. If you walk the banks of the Tigris today, you will not hear the clatter of the immortal's armor or the scratching of the tax collector's pen. You will find only pottery shards and the heavy silence of a dead empire. The administrative machinery that Shapur II weaponized, the seals, the taxes, the rigid hierarchy, dissolved into the sand when the Sassanid dynasty fell. The erasure is total, yet inverted. The King of Kings sought to make these women a blank space in the Persian population, a broken lineage. He succeeded in breaking their bodies, but the silence he enforced has become the loudest thing in the ruins. The dust of Ctesiphon no longer tastes of iron, it tastes of ash. The irreversible cost from the beginning was not the loss of the women's lives, but the loss of the empire's moral claim to its own history. The site of the massacre is now just coordinates in a wasteland. The witnesses are gone, the soldiers are gone, the scribe is gone. What remains is an echo that refuses to fade, a persistent lack of peace in a place that should be empty. The wind blowing through the broken arch does not sound like the glory of Shapur. It sounds like the breath of 300 women, held forever in the moment before the blade fell. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like. What you bury does not always stay dead. Sometimes it becomes the seed.